door valve thing. You guys get this? Where, so a ligand is like it comes in, it unlocks, so it binds to the receptor binding site and then it opens up a channel. Now we have different types of ligands, and we can also have pressure gated channels, such as the PZO. So this is an example of the PZO. Stretch happens, and we have this flux of ions moving. You can have GPCRs, such as the bradykinin and GABA and opioids. Is everyone with me on that?
So bradykinin is released in severe pain.
Yeah, it induces severe pain due to inflammation.
So it works on the C fiber?
So what would be an
Yes.
example of that for bradykinin? Like what kind of pain? Like would
So
it
you
be
get
like,
an inflammation, such as, let's say you get a bacterial infection or you get some sort of a tissue damage, then bradykinin's released.
like a jellyfish
the-
thing?
So yes, the part of the jellyfish that works on a phospholipase will cause bradykinin to be released, and then that would cause then pain. Now jellyfish is a little bit more. Nobody really knows how the jellyfish induces the pain.
So bradykinin comes off of injured cells?
Yeah, inflamed is a better buzzword for it. That catches everything. So inflamed tissues release bradykinin. The reason I'm bringing it up to you is that it's one of the, when they say inflammation has pain, a big chunk of why that inflammation has pain is inflammation has bradykinin, which causes pain.
And it only works on C fibers?
No, there's actually, it has binding sites on A deltas, so on nociceptive fibers.
Well, can they all be nociceptors in a sense? They're pushed to
No.
their limits?
No, so an A beta will not be a nociceptor.
It's the receptors that can all be nociceptive.
So the
Skin receptors.
the neurons, yeah, they don't have
Okay.
receptive neurons. And a thermal gate, you guys got that. And then you guys get this concept of the voltage. You get at a depolarizing voltage, the channel opens. At a high level of depolarization, the channel closes by a secondary mechanism, a secondary gate.
So what are the margins of the refractory period?
So the refractory period occurs when this gate is closed, that's absolute, and then it will continue as long as those potassium channels, voltage-gated potassium channels are open.
So once the potassium channel is closed, then that's the end of the refractory.
Right. Because then it's no longer, it goes from hyperpolarization and starts depolarization. The spindle apparatus mechanism, does everyone get this?
In regards to the spindle and the Golgi, like for
Mhm.
exam questions, what type of questions do you, obviously not what question, but what
Mhm.
type of questions will you be asking on this info?
Okay, so what is the encapsulated structure that detects muscle stretch? So that would be the spindle. That's the whole thing. And then what are the sensory neurons release what at the synapse? Or I'm trying to think of what another question would be. What's the name of the fibers within this?
Okay.
Yeah, interfusals. And then stretch of the interfusal fibers results in the activation of proprioceptive or mechanoreceptive, same thing, neurons that results in signaling to the brain, signaling to through the spinal cord. And then this is known as what kind of a synapse? Monosynaptic, trisynaptic, ipsilateral, contralateral. Ipsilateral monosynaptic. And then fires a motor neuron, causes contraction. And then I didn't say that you had to know that what type of neuron fiber, but that it also that a neuron fiber will adjust the turgor or the tension of the interfusal fibers. And then with the Golgi tendon, you have stretch receptors are interwoven in the collagen fibers of the tendon. These result in the stretch sensor, proprioceptor, mechanoreceptor, neuron activating an interneuron that releases glycine. So this part is something that I find fascinating, you should be aware of, right? And that now you're going to inhibit the alpha motor neuron and drop the load.
So the interneuron is releasing the glycine
Right,
to the third
right,
axon.
exactly. So before we had just one synapse, and now we've got 1, 2 in the spine.
So the signal comes up, the sensory neuron triggers the intermediate side.
Yeah, intermediate's good.
Intermediate.
Interneuron.
And the intermediate sends out glycine.
Right.
Glycine is,
Same as GABA.
okay.
So it's going to inhibit.
And is it always glutamate that is being released from
Yeah.
the sensory?
And I think that just about every sensory neuron that I know of releases glutamate. So they're always going to release glutamate, activate AMPA, activate NMDA, cause
What
that
about
fire.
acetylcholine then? Because when we were in muscle parts, we learned that was acetylcholine the one that mixed.
Yeah, so that's over here.
But
So,
it's,
so follow me through.
it's excitatory, right? Acetylcholine.
Yes,
Yeah.
but acetylcholine is the one that's released to excite the muscle.
The muscle.
And then this is the one that's released. So let's look at this neuron here. So at this side of the neuron, you have, it would be activated by glutamate, as we see here.
Mm-hmm.
And then that then sends an action potential to release acetylcholine here.
Thank you.
Yeah, you got it.
And that's ipsilateral as well.
And this is ipsilateral. Now the book had this thing about, and I showed the PowerPoint of where you can, it will also have then in certain times it will also have a contralateral oppositional action, but it's not something I'm that interested in this anyways. And then activation of a chili pepper. So chili pepper is going to activate this channel called TRPV1. TRPV1 is going to bring in sodium and calcium. The calcium is going to induce the exocytosis of inflammatory factors. The sodium will induce a depolarization by activating those voltage-gated sodium channels here at the initial segment. Does everyone get that? Then you get an action potential that will propagate all the way up, skipping basically the soma, and go all the way up to the spinal sensory neuron synapse. And then it's just like before, you have this release of glutamate. Glutamate binds to the AMPA receptors, NMDA receptors, and metabotropic glutamate receptors to GPCR, and you get an action potential. One of them is going to go up to the brain to say, ow, and the other one's going through again, synapse with the motor neuron releasing glutamate, and that motor neuron will then send a signal to cause the muscle to contract to remove your hand so that you have an immediate reflex.
Why is it myelinated and unmyelinated?
Oh, because it could be either a C fiber or an A delta fiber. So there's two types of pain responsive fibers. So two types of nociceptors.
Well,
Right.
the C's are unmyelinated.
Right, well the C's are unmyelinated. And you're gonna have calcium that's gonna influx here, and it's exactly as we see in that first, in the big picture that we'll go through. And if you had voltage gated, so let's say what would happen to the perception if an inhibitory GPCR, and I find it easiest for these questions to go look at the cheat picture, and I expect you guys to do the same, is use this picture because this picture tells you a lot about what goes on in synapses. So let's say an inhibitory GPCR was activated at the presynaptic neuron terminal. So we go up to this picture and say, okay, presynaptic neuron terminal, that's this one, that GPCR. What would happen? Well, it's going to inhibit the release of glutamate. So that would mean that there would be no pain because the glutamate is being released due to pain. Does everyone get that? Excellent. And that's how like your opioids work. And so then he says with realizing that there's a crap load more going on, the voltage gated calcium channel was blocked at the presynaptic terminal. So no calcium coming in, no glutamate release, no pain. GABA pain. Voltage gated sodium channels along the sensory neuron pseudoaxon were blocked. So if you block these, so no action potential propagation, no pain. And then what can C fibers do in addition to carry action potentials? They can release inflammatory peptides or factors or whatever you want to call them, or whatever I want to call them. Yes, right? No. Bradykinin's going to be kind of bringing it on back from the inflammatory event.
Are you gonna ask us the different types of inflammatory factors or just
No.
generally that?
Yeah, just general.
Okay.
The word inflammatory factors is what I'll use.
So why isn't it bradykinin again?
Bradykinin, so it's because bradykinin is something that's released by inflammation, and so the cells that cause for the bradykinin to be produced are not the C fibers. These are substance P and CGRP and some other inflammatory peptides.
So that would release inflammatory peptides, and would that in turn?
Yeah, would in turn release bradykinin. So how is pain resulting TRPV1 induced action potentials perceived? And then of course A deltas is going to be fast because they're myelinated, and C fibers is going to be slow, throbbing. And then label each of these, hair roots, blah blah blahs, blah blah blahs. You guys need me to go through this?
No.
Which ones are fast, which ones are slow? Which ones are similar to the sensory neuron apparatus or encapsulated apparatus for the Golgi tendon organ and for the spindle fiber? What? The Raffinis. So Raffinis are basically the one in the skin, then there's the one in the tendon, and then there's one in the spindle. What action potential, so what kind of neurons are attached to all the tactile ones? What kind of fibers, I mean?
The first one, the A beta.
Yeah. The first one is actually the A alpha. Who's that?
I guess I was thinking
Weird.
of the A beta, A delta, and then the
Yeah.
C.
So when we think of A delta, A alpha, who do we think of? Motor neurons, right. Although there's some other ones that I'm not making you learn.
Should we be concerned with the gammas and all?
What?
Should we be
No.
concerned with the gamma and all?
No,
Not even in the muscle spindle.
not even the muscle spindle. I remember saying that in class. Don't worry about it. And so now I got to stick to it.
So no.
Although I did have a question that I was gearing to rate, It's like I keep on cutting my feet out from underneath me.
Thank you, Bret.
But it's like, I don't see it having any value to you guys in the long run.
I assure you
But
there's
all
no
this
lack-
other stuff
There's
does.
no lack of info, I assure you.
Right. Okay, so tissue damage, inflammation induces nociception, what we already just talked about. What chemical is released by that tissue damage and inflammation? Bradykinin, causes pain. What ion channel is activated by noxious reactive chemicals?
Tripping one, the one you discovered.
I didn't discover it. I discovered that it induces tear gas, or tear gas activates it. And in the airways, the airway responses, especially to reactive chemicals. But it was discovered by a friend of mine. What else activates TRPA1? And this my friend found.
Really cold.
No, actually, he didn't find that. That was actually his controversy.
Mustard oil.
Mustard oil. And where do we get mustard oil?
Wasabi.
And horseradish. And so onion and garlic also activate this channel. And if you, so in addition to the airway constriction and muscles mucus secretion and tearing, what does your brain perceive?
Pain.
Is that like a super cold one?
It is the super cold one. Just my friend didn't discover it. Instead of GABA A in the motor neuron dendrites, what do we have? Glycine for those Golgi tendon reflexes. How can you block glycine? Does anybody remember? No? Strychnine.
Oh, rat poison.
Yeah. Okay. So here was that opioid, endogenous opioids that you don't have to memorize. And then GIs activate a potassium channel, inhibit a calcium, voltage-gated calcium channels, and inhibit the enzyme AC that makes cyclic AMP. Okay, intercellular conditions, do they change
No.
from action potentials? No.
Can you explain that question in the quiz about the potassium being the same concentration on the outside and the inside? Do you remember that?
Oh, you mean if I said that if,
If the pump doesn't
Yeah.
work.
so if you have the same potassium, so what determines what determines the resting potential?
Difference in concentration.
No, lead channels, right?
Right here?
Oh, yeah.
But you're one step in front of that. And what determines the movement? So leak channels cause potassium to go out, or allow potassium, a method to go out of a cell, right?
Right.
What's driving that potassium out of that cell?
Concentration gradient.
So if you have no concentration gradient, where's the potassium?
Nowhere.
No. So if there's the same amount of potassium as negative charges, and so, and you have potassium over here, it's like chloride, whatever. So will the potassium go through the channel?
Oh, you-
Yeah, there's no drive. And so will there be a negative charge on the inside?
What about the sodium
It
channel?
stays negative.
As long as the sodium channels are closed. If the sodium channels are open, then sodium's gonna come in
Because there are
and
sodium.
cause it even more positive.
Right, but that's why the question is confusing, is because it didn't say whether or not the sodium leak channels were open or closed. So it didn't take them into account.
I think it said they were open, but the pump was not working.
No, on the online
Quiz,
quiz?
yeah.
No, the
Oh, the
online
online
quiz didn't
quiz.
mention the pump or anything.
Oh,
It just said what would happen if you had the same potassium inside and outside, but
Right.
didn't say anything about the other leak channels, but they do have an impact, right?
yeah, so that's a very good point.
This is that question.
So that your
The zero one, right?
Yeah, the
your
zero.
sodium channels, even though they're leaking slowly, they would continue to leak, and you would get, it would go towards positive 55 milliliters.
Eventually.
Yeah, and so your membrane would actually get a resting potential of positive 55. If they could do it.
I still don't like
Right.
that question.
But
But
what
we're pretending
happens?
they're closed in the quiz.
But what happens in a condition where you're killing somebody is that this happens. So you give them an injection where there's no sodium, because you keep it osmotically equal. So you're giving them just potassium, no sodium, so no going through there. And that potassium equals, it causes this now to depolarize. And so they go into, their neuron basically is depolarized. And what, in the heart, that depolarization results then in a contraction and they die.
The potassium depolarizes the membrane?
Right, because the potassium on both sides, basically the membrane, if we take away the no sodium, then the membrane is going to be
Zero.
0
It's
millivolts,
neutral.
which is depolarized. Because anything above minus 50 or so is considered depolarized. Does that make sense?
I think
It
I
makes it
mixed
more
up
positive
three
than minus
questions
50.
in my head, so.
Okay, so minus 70 is resting. And so, and if you want to get away from the numbers,
Are you talking about so membrane potential refers to the inside of a membrane? I thought potassium was at minus 90. Really wrong.
so membrane potential refers to the charge here and here, amount of charge difference between these sides, like a volt.
Voltage potential.
That's the same thing. So membrane potential is membrane voltage potential. It just means the voltage across the membrane instead of voltage across the battery. Okay? And so you guys are looking worried. It's not that difficult, really. And so what happens with the resting membrane potential is that you have this drive for potassium to go out. Right? And that makes it about minus 70 millivolts. It would go out until minus 90, but there's some sodium that's leaking in, making it minus 70. But if you take away the drive for the potassium to go out, no potassium goes out, then all of a sudden your resting potential is going to go up.
Oh, the potassium. Oh,
Okay. And so now this is going to become depolarized.
okay.
And so the point is that you realize that behind everything is the gradient of potassium. That's the driving, not really force, but driving factor of everything. Okay? Okay. If a neuron releases the neurotransmitter glutamate at one synapse, can it release GABA at a different synapse? Or is it basically one neurotransmitter for a neuron?
Multiple neurotransmitters.
You can only have one neuron, one neurotransmitter for GABA and glutamate. So you can't have GABA being released by glutamate neurons and glutamate being released by GABA neurons. You can have peptide factors that are released by both. But we're not talking about peptides. That's why I made sure for this part. Because I'm sure when I knew you'd look it up on Wikipedia. What?
But it can receive different neurotransmitters.
Right. But the neuron can receive and does receive synapses to a variety of different neurotransmitters. Okay, so that's that part of the homework. Now let's go to the first part. Okay, does everybody know their glia
Yes.
and the axon hillock,
Yeah.
Yes.
axons, dendrites, cell bodies,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
how they differ for PNS and CNS? What are the three types?
Yep.
What are the three types, you guys?
Unipolar, bipolar.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's one for you, Ms. Wilkinson. What is voltage potential?
So it's not from outside to inside. The difference between the inside and the outside of the membrane.
Yeah, it's just the charge difference between the inside and the
That is,
outside. Yeah, and that's what membrane potential is.
oh, same as memory.
Yeah, so that was all these questions that we just went over. On the same plasma membrane, does everyone understand what an AMPA receptor channel is?
Yes.
GABA,
Yeah.
Yeah.
blah, 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 blah. Okay.
I have just a quick question.
Mhm.
When is it a GPCR versus just an ionotropic? Is there-
Okay. When is it metabotropic? When's
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
So it all has to do with whether it's a channel or not. So ionotropic allows ions, or positive, whatever, to cross.
Yeah.
So it's
GPCRs don't.
Is 2A then allowing sodium through that AMPA channel?
Yeah. So AMPA glutamate binds here,
So it's
like that key, and this opens up the lock. And so now your door opens up and in this case, sodium will go through.
Well, one's a door, one's a telephone.
Yeah, and this or a doorbell or something. So this one, glutamate binds here, and it releases this guy to then go do stuff.
A G protein.
Yeah,
It releases a G as
Second.
G protein, right?
Second
Or
messenger.
depending upon where it is.
Okay.
Wait a minute,
So if
where
it's
is
on the presynaptic side, then it releases a GI, which is an inhibitor, so that the next time there's not a firing. And with that, let's go to,
Bret,
yeah.
what activates metabotropic inhibitory autoreceptors?
So the same neurotransmitter that's being released, that's why it's called an autoreceptor. So it'll bind to that GPCR to then, it's on the presynaptic side.
So it's just a different kind of.
Yeah, that then inhibits the firing of the next, so it inhibits vesicle exocytosis for the next turnaround. And so usually it doesn't bind as readily to glutamate, so it requires more glutamate in the synapse. So if there's too much glutamate, that this thing gets bound, and it's basically sending a signal back up to say, okay, let's not make this neuron fire as much. Don't release as many vesicles of glutamate. You got too much in the synapse. Okay, but yeah. And then this last thing. All right, let's go through the steps real quick. So where is this occurring? In an axon or in a dendrite?
Resting, that's a dendrite. Resting potential.
Well, this whole event here.
Just on the whole line, then a dendrite. Oh, not really.
This is only happening in axons and down to axon terminals. In a dendrite, we have a gradient potential. So those are the IPSPs and EPSPs. So excitatory potentials, inhibitory potentials. So on an axon, the first step that's going to happen is we have resting potential, and then this EPSP comes in that's enough, let's say this is at the axon hillock, this is enough to activate the voltage-gated sodium channels. These voltage-gated sodium channels rapidly open, which we're seeing happening at 4, up to 5, where they close by their inactivation gates. So from here to here they're open, and then at 5 they close. And then they're closed, so no more sodium can come in, and the potassium channels open, and they let potassium flood out to counteract the positive charges that came in. Positive charges are now leaving. And so it drops it back down to minus, and it actually drops it below resting potential. It's called hyperpolarization. And during this time when the sodium channels are closed, then that's called absolute refraction. And then when that time that you have this hyperpolarization, it's a continuation of refraction, which can be called a lot of different names. Yeah.
Refractory, there's like 2 different types of refractory, but on the quiz
Right.
you just said refractory.
Right, and the reason I say that is because this one gets,
'Cause I didn't know how to answer that.
you mean when it said refractory?
Yeah, because you had, in PowerPoint, it was on the left side of 5, it was called absolute, and then.
Right, so I just did glum these together. The reason for that is that this refractory period, which can be called temporary, intermediate, and some other terms depending upon which text, I just call it, it's refractory. It
All
mean,
the way to 7, 1 through
yeah,
7.
actually all the way to basically about this 2 millisecond point. This part of the refractory period is not that,
It's not absolute.
it's not an absolute thing. It's fuzzy stuff. It just means while it's hyperpolarized, it's less likely to fire. And the book likes to make a deal out of this, and I don't, because in reality, it doesn't have that much compared to this. It doesn't have much of a factor.
So refractory ends at 2 milliseconds.
Yeah. And then after that, then you goes back to resting potential. Okay, and now going to the next is the GPCRs. What are the 3 things that GI does?
Inhibits and stimulates.
And what does it inhibit?
Yeah,
Opening.
And what does it stimulate?
Potassium channels.
Open.
And what else does it inhibit?
GI,
Yeah.
basically AMP.
Right?
Wait, what was
And
that
then
third one?
it inhibits the production of cyclic AMP.
So then you don't have AMP. Right?
No. Cyclic AMP is a signal molecule that then gets broken down into AMP.
Right.
We
So
never
you
talked
don't have
about
cyclic AMP and AMP.
Well, no, you still, AMP still exists.
Oh, okay. It just doesn't go down the line.
Right.
Okay.
It doesn't get converted from ATP, so you have more ATP. But it's not that big of a signaler to make much of a difference on that dynamo.
Are you gonna ask any questions on that G protein?
No, all I'm gonna ask, no,
Okay.
that answers that.
No questions. Yep,
Sit down.
on that one.
Okay, so let's go to I just sent out this, it looks like I sent it twice
Yeah, you did.
without sending the doc file. But the PDF style, so if we look at this, let's go to the axon drawing.
I wish your screen was smaller. Then you could put them side by side.
Yeah.
Two different screens.
Okay, so here, this is,
Jamie's.
Can you send that out?
yeah. And so this is, I'm gonna show this picture or my picture, and you can choose which picture you like to follow. And then here is what I just wrote of my explanation, and you can compare it to your explanation. Okay, so an axon myelin sheath by an oligodendrite insulates the axon, allowing for the fast action potential conduction.
Before you start, what is going to be the format of this question? We're going to be relaying this to you?
Yes,
And it could be A, B, C, it doesn't have to be
Yeah.
paragraph form.
right. You can relay it exactly as I did, or you can relay it in paragraph form.
So
And-
if I wrote a paragraph of this,
Make sure
Yeah.
you cover it all.
That's fine.
it's fine. Okay.
Yeah, the point is, make sure you cover it all.
Okay.
Because what I'm gonna go through is make sure you named it, and gave an explanation of
Why did you do that to yourself, Brett?
it. I know.
This is
it's-
an essay, we're just writing, filling in the blank, and we just
Right.
You're gonna be
And so
actually writing.
this is the answer
For example.
that I see it, but you don't have to,
I know.
it's not an absolute answer. But what this is basically is this is my cheat sheet.
So don't expect our exam grades for like a month.
No, that's not true. You'll be there.
You haven't seen
Uh,
some people or people's handwriting.
Yeah, you'll work with me, and so that way we'll make sure that we get it faster.
Oh.
It's going to be a lot of fun. I agree. It's really easy to grade if you guys do a good job. The ones that suck to grade are the ones that I'm looking for something to give you some points.
Yeah.
So don't be that person. Be the nice person that gives me exactly a nice, could be in paragraph form. I can read through something like that in seconds as long as it's correct. I can just go, yep, answer, done. 30 points.
Yeah, rather
But
write a story.
if I go through it and it's like, you know, they got the node of Ranvier wrong, they had no idea actually what an action potential is, and any of the steps, then it's awful. You want me to go through it?
Yes.
No.
Yes, yes.
Oh, wait, yeah.
I thought
He
so.
said yes.
I think you already
So
have
we'll
it.
use your synapse.
I think it's already up. On the other tab, up top.
Oh, yes, it is.
I'm going to use it this way, that way.
Oh.
Um,
Oh, that's right, you can zoom in on it.
Ooh, that's some serious bigness.
okay. And now let's get to, I have no idea what that is. Sorry, 1 second. Okay.
This explanation is under homework? This explanation is under homework?
I think it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Let's see.
Okay, so we're starting out at 1A. And this is a presynaptic axon, and the 1A is the myelin sheath by an oligodendrite, which insulates the axon, allowing for a fast action potential conduction,
Also known as a salivary conduction.
or salutary conduction is fine. And then here at 1A, 1 is the node of Ranvier, and this is a gap between the myelin sheaths, which contains these 1B1s, the voltage-gated sodium channels, which salutatorily perpetuate the action potential conduction. At action potential propagation at 1B goes into the axon terminal, and the action potential results from the depolarization reaching the threshold to open these voltage-gated sodium channels, here shown at 1B. Sodium pours in, causing a rapid depolarization of the membrane. The membrane is repolarized by voltage-gated potassium channels opening and the voltage-gated sodium channels being closed. Thus, action potentials happen in only one direction. Is everyone with me on that?
Yeah.
The depolarization activates the voltage-gated calcium channel. Calcium pours in and causes the exocytosis of vesicles containing glutamate. Glutamate can be removed from the synapse by the transporter. I think we got this wrong here. I think this was supposed to be 1E.
Oh,
Who wrote this thing?
oh, yeah.
I don't know, your explanation came after.
So that was.
I copied your synapse.
I know.
Doofus.
That was supposed to be an E, it's just that it was all junk. Okay, so at 1F, we have glutamate can also bind to this inhibitory autoreceptor, and that will decrease further action potential, further release of glutamate by opening a potassium channel that counteracts the action potential, and it will cause the inhibition of voltage-gated calcium channels from ultimate. You get that,
Circles are
Fiona?
supposed to be calcium?
The glutamate or the circles.
What are those circles?
What are these? These are GPC. This is the G protein. So the G protein will leave the G protein receptor and bind onto these potassium channels, causing potassium to efflux, making the cell more negative, and then it will bind to these calcium channels, stopping calcium from incoming. Okay? And then when we go to the other side, we haven't gotten to deal with the glutamate quite yet. We're going to deal with this guy first. I didn't know which order to put them, but this is the one, that's basically what we did. And so here we have the axon-axon inhibition from of the GABA with the glutamate, of GABA onto the glutamate synapse, or the glutamate releasing axon. So GABA releases, vesicles of GABA are released into the synapse. GABA goes across the synapse, binds to GABA A, which allows for chloride to come through, and binds to GABA B, which is the same thing as the autoinhibitory actions. So GI does the same thing over here as well, causing opening of potassium channels and blocking these calcium channels.
So those
That's on the
G
presynaptic, right?
This is presynaptic.
Okay.
It will do basically the same thing on the postsynaptic too, right? Except for you have actions on,
I'm just wondering
The-
where it was. That's why.
okay. So
Except you have
presynaptic.
actions like.
It will have the same actions on the, except for it will not have a voltage-gated calcium channel. It'll have a adenylate cyclase that's inhibited. And so this results in inhibition then of the release of that axon, so you can have axons that inhibit other axons from firing.
So those circles are G proteins again.
Yeah,
And they're inhibitory.
right.
When it's one-on-one like that, what happens? When it's glutamate and GABA one-on-one?
When GABA binds here,
Well, if it's GABA,
so if it's GABA inhibiting glutamate,
yeah.
then glutamate doesn't as readily release. Now,
So would that be the same thing as with Maria's question about when glutamate is inhibited? Is it just inhibited by GABA, or
wait,
is there
glutamate inhibited, I'm
when
sorry.
when is glutamate inhibited? Can it be inhibited besides the calcium?
So glutamate, the excitatory amino acid glutamate, when it's released, it will bind onto autoreceptors.
Right.
And those autoreceptors will inhibit future release of glutamate. So look here on the overhead.
It regulates.
So this G protein
Mhm.
will then, if this binds to glutamate, will then inhibit future release of glutamate. If GABA
That
binds,
is the auto. That is also another auto receptor, right?
Metabotropic.
Yeah.
so metabotropic means G protein,
Right.
G protein
Yeah.
coupled. So
Okay.
ionotropic means ion channel.
I just gotta keep remembering all the different names of the channels and which one is it.
So let's break it down. So metabotropic means GPCR.
Right.
So they mean the same thing.
Okay.
Ionotropic means ion channel.
Right.
It means the same thing. So an auto metabotropic means it's auto binding itself,
Binding.
not binding the next neuron over.
So the the autoreceptor is basically a self-regulating mechanism.
It's a self-regulating mechanism.
Is this a motor neuron?
It's like 3 different ones that coordinate super. It's just like you just pick one of the 3.
It could be.
Just
I
go
mean,
for it.
it's predominantly every other neuron in the body. So, so you have glutamate released at these synapses. But, you know, instead of it being glutamate, this could be a synapse for acetylcholine. This could be a synapse for dopamine. This could be a synapse for anything. They all work this way. This is the general mechanism. So why am I making you guys go through this tedious stuff that you're all, I can feel you mumbling, is because all of these, this is the site of everything that's happening in neuro treatments. You're going to be acting on this, the synapse.
The presynaptic is where we do most
Presynaptic,
of
well,
the-
postsynaptic too. You have receptors for blocking these things, and blocking this enzyme and opening up GABA channels that are acting right here.
And beta blockers?
So a beta blocker is blocking the effects of norepinephrine in the brain. It's norepinephrine in the brain. In the periphery, it's affecting adrenaline, epinephrine. More than. So the calming effect of the beta blocker. So some people who have test anxiety are going to take a beta blocker, so that's going to stop norepinephrine's effects. Your locus coeruleus releases norepinephrine. You're getting a panic attack. You're going to stop that by blocking the GPCR that's activated by norepinephrine. Okay? You're all like, now we get it. We get that one. Okay, so then here, so glutamate's released. It can be reuptaked by the astrocyte as well, and so can GABA. Glutamate can also be destroyed by a destructive enzyme. And glutamate, when it crosses the synapse, binds to receptors. And it will bind to the AMPA receptor, which causes sodium to pour in, and it binds to the NMDA receptor, and then thereby causing calcium to form through. Calcium causes intracellular effects, and that's all we have to say about it.
Gene expressions.
And gene expression's fine if you put it in there. And then the sodium pouring in increases the EPSP, right? Increases a depolarizing graded potential, because now we're on the dendrite side. The glutamate can also bind to a GPCR that's coupled to GS that activates an enzyme adenylate cyclase, and we'll have this AC here, so you can just write AC is fine, and that causes the production of cyclic AMP. So you just have to know that this one is the stimulatory side and this is the inhibitory side. So GABA is going to inhibit, glutamate's going to stimulate. Can you guys get that? And then the inhibitory, now this is the one dendritic spine over. So we have one side that has the glutamate and one side that has GABA. So one side, so this is going to be IPSP. They're going to combine and cancel each other out maybe, or not, depending upon how many other glutamate neurons are coming into other dendrites. Does everyone get that concept? So you have a summation.
The postsynaptic.
So here we're postsynaptic.
And then presynaptic on
We
the
were.
right is going to be,
There we are.
just on the right is your presynaptic inhibiting, sorry,
They're both postsynaptic.
This is all postsynaptic now.
No, I
Is
think
that
you're
So-
talking about the neuron on the right.
This neuron here is GABA, and this one up here is glutamate.
Yeah.
They're both working on a dendrite, so these are both presynaptic and this is postsynaptic. It's just that this neuron has more than one synapse. It has a synapse with glutamate and a synapse next door with GABA. So the two can cancel each other out if they're activated at the same time. So let's say, so basically this is awake and this is during sleep. This one gets activated during sleep. Now this neuron's going to go and not be activated and you can go to sleep. Or test anxiety, you're going to be less anxious, you can relax. Your Xanax kicks in and you miss the exam because of its effects on the hippocampus. All right, so any more questions on this?
The astrocyte is just another means of sort of putting balance back into the presynaptic.
Just clearance.
The synaptic cleft.
Yeah, it's just the garbage cleaning. It just removes it all out.
So the enzyme, the astrocyte, and
Yeah.
the reuptake are just putting everything back into homeostasis.
Right, yeah, just clearance. Yes,
And the astrocyte is not specific to one.
right, exactly, yes.
Can you go back to GABA the first one?
GABA the first, yes.
Say, besides the inhibitions, including exocytosis.
So it's going to stop the exocyte. So here, it's going to be released by exocytosis, and then it's going to inhibit exocytosis of this neuron, this axon, by causing potassium to go out, so counteract the action potentials, and blocking voltage-gated calcium channels, so stopping them from bringing in calcium. No calcium coming in, no exocytosis.
Exocytosis or exon, it won't, it just won't happen.
Right. So now the axon won't release the neurotransmitter.
I also just wanted to clarify that on the same side, the GABA A is actually allowing the chloride that's coming in,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And then right above it, the GABA B is a G, it's not ionotropic, it's
Yeah.
GABA-tropic.
Right. So that's why I don't have a little, or Jamie doesn't have a little arrow going through it.
Okay. So that is then releasing potassium
It acts.
through ion.
So then it binds to a potassium channel and to a calcium channel. So it's an intermediate. So it then regulates ion channels, but not directly. The GABA doesn't do it directly. It tells somebody else to do it. Does that make sense?
Yes, and it's activating, second messenger is activating potassium channels.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so now let's go to the brain.
Yay.
Yes.
So second messengers, is that the GI and DS, or is that the cyclic?
Oh, cyclic AMP is the second messenger. Is the only one that we've mentioned. Calcium too, but yeah.
The GI and the GS is not a second messenger, it's either the.
It's